Hello, and welcome to the Pat Conroy Literary Center virtual open mic night. I am your host this evening, Melissa Whiteford St. Clair, and I bring greetings from the Pat Conroy Literary Center Executive Director, Jonathan Haupt. Welcome to tonight's readers, and a special welcome to our featured author, novelist Laura Leigh Morris. Hey, everybody. Pat Conroy Literary Center open mic nights are held monthly from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern, alternating between virtual and in-person open mic nights, which take place at the Pat Conroy Literary Center. Our monthly open mic night is presented in partnership with the South Carolina Writers Association and live streamed on the Conroy Center's Facebook page and also available later on the Conroy Center's YouTube page. Our featured presenter is novelist Laura Leigh Morris, author of The Stonecatchers. Next month's open mic featured presenter is debut novelist Mary J. Nestor, author of Bus Number 7. Watch for future featured writer open mic announcements on the Pat Conroy Literary Center Facebook page. Open mic will also feature short readings of 3 to 5 minutes by each writer in many genres. And tonight we have a small, and I will say, but mighty lineup of readers. So again, welcome everyone, and let's get started. So we do a round robin with the readers, and then I will introduce and turn the mic over to Laura Leigh Morris. So welcome. Abigail, I guess you are first in the lineup, starting with A, right? Abigail, thank you.
That works. Hi, everyone. I'm a low country author of short stories, poetry, and novels. Tonight, I'm going to briefly speak about my fifth novel, which is titled Unopened. It is a contemporary fiction with a hint of suspense. It is about a 14-year-old girl, Ellie, who uncovers a box in the attic that belonged to her late mother, revealing secrets and forcing her to confront hidden truths. The scene takes place in Northeastern High School, where Hillary Jones, the principal, meets a new student, Ellie, whose face stirs a distant memory she thought she had buried deep within. Hillary stared at the girl in front of her. How had she not seen it before? Thick auburn hair, freckles speckled her nose and cheeks, her soft pale skin and those eyes. They were dead giveaways. She knew only one girl in her life who had those eyes, Carrie Carmichael. She could hardly concentrate as the memory of her friend's funeral floated to the surface. The old church on Huckleberry Street was packed, rows of strangers. She remembered thinking how Carrie would have loved this. All these people came together just for her. The line to the casket wrapped around the sanctuary and out to the parking lot. She had never seen so many people. She stood there looking down at the bulletin that the nice old man had handed her at the doorway. It read so formally, seemed almost brash and impersonal. If she had written it, she would have said something about the way Carrie loved to swim in the lake behind her house and bask in the sunlight, or the way she never knew a stranger. Unlike her, she spoke to everyone. Never mattered what they looked like, if they were willing to listen to her stories, she was always willing to share, even if most of them were untrue. At her coffin, she leaned forward and whispered, "I'm sorry," knowing it didn't matter now, but they were the words she should have said a long time ago. Carrie's sun-kissed freckles were covered by a mound of makeup, her blue eyes shut for eternity, and her brown hair streaked with blonde highlights. The church choir sang the "Oh Happy Day" hymn and clapped their hands. She quietly went to her seat toward the back pew and heard someone from across the church shout her name, but she ignored it. Instead, she listened to the lyrics and thought about the time Carrie and she watched Sister Act 2. Carrie wouldn't stop singing that song afterward. It drove Hillary crazy. But as she sat there, the music flowed through her, almost making her feel as though the song spoke to her. She prayed that day for the first time in a long time and sang that song nonstop for a few days afterwards, hoping Jesus would wash her sins away. Now she saw the sorrow deep within the girl's eyes that sat in front of her. She wanted to confront her, but knew she shouldn't. She needed to stay focused, professional, but her heart tugged her toward another direction, one that she wasn't comfortable with. She placed her hands on the desk and stood. I'll have my secretary print out your schedule and lead you to your first class. Just ask for Betty up front. She's the one with the red curly hair. Ellie nodded and left. Hillary closed the door behind her, but she knew it wasn't closed all the way. So, thank you. So you can find Unopened on Amazon. And I'm also at the Ravenel Market on September 20th. So you can come see me and I would be happy to sign a copy for you as well. So thank you. Thank you. And I can't wait to hear Laura.
Awesome, Abigail. Thank you. And I'm excited that you have an event on my birthday.
Good day.
And next in the lineup, we have a special treat this evening is Jonathan Haupt. Jonathan, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I never ever read at open mic, but since we have a small group and seemingly have time, and because it was handy, I'm going to read part of my introduction to Our Prince of Scribes, in which Furman University actually appears. So it seems appropriate tonight. So let me find my magic page. Yep. And do this to our Zoom. All right. So obviously, this is Our Prince of Scribes, the anthology that I am embarrassingly proud co-editor of, featuring 67 writers who were mentored and championed and otherwise befriended by Pat Conroy. And in the introduction, I sort of try and explain what that meant in the way that Pat taught me to explain things by telling a story about it. So this is sort of my Pat Conroy story that's embedded within the introduction to Our Prince of Scribes. Following a particularly lively evening with Story River Books in front of an audience of several hundred at Furman University, the sports rival of Pat's alma mater, the Citadel, Pat and I settled in at a table in front of a long line of fans eager for his autograph. Pat signed for 3 hours that night, always striving to carry on a meaningful conversation with every single reader in that line, letting them know how much he treasured his audience. While the majority of books put in front of him were his own, he was delighted whenever a Story River book by another writer was extended to him to inscribe. At the end of the night, when all the other writers had left and only Pat, the venue staff, my wife, and I remained, Pat rose at last from the table and bellowed, "Haupt! I have never worked so fucking hard in my life to sell books by other writers." "Your writers," I corrected him. "Our writers," he corrected me, ever the good teacher. "And do you love it?" I asked him. He paused for a moment, just long enough for a twinkle, a chuckle, and a dropping of their curmudgeonly facade. Then came the truth teller's honest answer. "Yes, yes, I do." Our Prince of Scribes is our collective return of Pat Conroy's faith in other writers, a giving back of the great love Pat entrusted in each of us represented in this collection, and in so many writers whose lives he touched and whose hearts he opened with the overarching message of his timeless body of work. You are not alone. Pat's legacy is still growing. His star is still ascending through his beloved books, through our remembrances of his instructive example, through the brilliant writings of the Story River Books family he forged and the even larger tribe of writers he inspired, and through the yeoman's work of the new Conroy Center established in his honor and in his stead. This collection, Our Prince of Scribes, is our gift to writers and to readers. We honor Pat by sharing his stories and our own, our truths as we know them to be. "Tell me a story," Pat would say. These are the stories writers tell of Pat Conroy, our friend, our teacher, our Prince of Scribes.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was awesome. I guess that leaves me as the next reader in the lineup. Okay. So, after learning about William Jim Capers through my DAR chapter, which is actually the Thomas Hayward Jr. chapter in Beaufort, and doing some more research, I wrote a poem about a Revolutionary War patriot, Drum Major William Jim Capers. Drum Major William Jim Capers. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. Drum roll for William Jim Capers, a free African American in June of 1775. Revolutionary War drum major. Instead of a flintlock musket, his battle weapon was made of taunt calfskin, sending vital signals for nearly a mile. The drumbeat marked bivouac and battleground calls. Left, right, left. Keep the troops in step. Camp life danced to a daily rhythm. Wake up, lights out, Sunday worship, post mail, chop firewood, chow line. Music to break the silence of monotony. Pensive soldiers on tenterhooks, back and forth pace of guard duty. Skirmishes kept a comin', capers kept a drummin'. Port Royal Island, February 3rd, 1779. Gray's Hill, February 14th, 1779. Savannah Siege, September to October, 1779. Camden, August 16th, 1780. Biggin Church, July 17th, 1781. Utah Springs, September 8th, 1781. Yorktown, late September to October 19th, 1781. No longer a dawning day for reveille, the bugler trumpets taps. Enlisting in the 4th South Carolina Regiment at age 33, lending syncopation to 7 battles, witness to the percussion of fierce fights. Discharge in 1782 followed your suffering of 4 wounds the year before. Affirmed for a pension by attestation of fellow veterans. At ease, patriot, take your rest. The tempo of your 111 years were revolutionary. Drum Major William Jim Capers. Thank you. Well, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our featured writer tonight, Laura Leigh Morris. I'll share her bio, and then Laura, you can have the mic. Laura Leigh Morris is the author of The Stonecatchers, a novel, a finalist for the 2024 Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction, and Jaws of Life Stories. She's previously published short fiction and essays in Story Magazine, North American Review, the Florida Review, and other journals. She teaches creative writing and literature at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. Welcome, Laura Leigh Morris. We are looking forward to your reading and sharing, and let us know anything that I missed in your bio that you would additionally like to share. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And now I'm realizing, did I say Greenville wrong all these years? I'm saying Greenville, not Greenville. I feel like I live in Sans Souci, which in Greenville is Sans Souci. So I know I've been saying my neighborhood wrong all these years, but I'm good with it. I'm good with it. I kind of love it. Thank you all for having me tonight. I'm so excited to be here, and I love hearing like all of these different, like, we have fiction, we have poetry, we have this introduction. And I remember, so I started at Furman University in fall of 2015, and right after I got here, my colleagues were like, nah, so we're going to have this big thing with Pat Conroy here. And it was huge. We had hundreds of people. There were lines out the door. And all I could think was, is this what we do for all writers? But I did not realize then that this is what you do for Pat Conroy. So I felt like that was my introduction to Furman. That was my introduction to this is how we treat, this man. He is Southern royalty. So I absolutely adored it. And he was so lovely. He was and I was a brand new professor, and he was just so lovely, so generous. Was like, send me your book. I want to see it. Like, he was just really fantastic. So I don't know that there's any way around that. So what I'm going to read from tonight is my most recent book, The Stone Catchers, and it is a little bit dark, especially in a dark time. I'm not going to read a super dark. I'm not sure that there are really bright sections of it, but I'm not going to read anything violent tonight. But it is the story of four survivors of a mass shooting at a community college in rural West Virginia. So when the shooter has gone through this building, and then he breaches the barricade in this last classroom. And when he does that, four members of the classroom rush to disarm him, which is actually oddly what they teach us to do when you do school shooter training. It's a very weird thing. But in that frenzy of trying to disarm him, they end up killing him. And this is the opening of the book. But because what the book's really about is how do you survive something like that? These four people are called, they're the good guy with the gun that we always hear about. But what does it actually mean to be a good guy with a gun? So the book itself rotates between these four characters who all step forward. And tonight I'm going to share the perspective of one of those. I'm going to share from a little bit of chapter 3. This is the character we're going to hear from is Charlie Folger. Charlie Folger is a young man who goes to this community college, and it turns out that when he was a young boy, he lived up the street from another young boy named Wayne Buckley, and Wayne Buckley just happens to be the shooter here. So Charlie has been reintroduced to Wayne at the beginning of this semester. They've connected, they're starting to form a friendship, and then this shooting happens. So I'm going to read from a scene where Charlie is going to visit Wayne's mom on the night of the shooting because he feels some sort of he feels a little bit, I mean, he feels a lot of guilt, he feels a lot of anger, he feels a lot of confusion, but he feels like he really has to go see this woman to share what has happened there. He ran toward Brickton Community College's campus, and though he didn't want to, he put his head down and moved toward the quad, intending to go as fast as possible to shield his gaze from the carnage. At the side entrance, sawhorses blocked the road and cops guarded the way through. Charlie took a left and sped up. When he got to the next road, another barricade was set up, and Charlie realized he'd have to go around the entire perimeter, adding a mile to his run. His lungs and legs rebelled, but his mind was calmed. He rounded the corner onto Brickton Avenue and toward the main entrance, then stopped. The crowd was gathered, hundreds of them, some holding candles, others holding stuffed animals, still more with their arms wrapped around one another. Some bowed their heads in prayer, tears ran down faces. A low murmur came from the crowd, sobs. People moved toward the front gate to lay stuffed animals or flowers, cards, or notes atop a pile that already spanned the length of the fence. News cameras were trained on the mass of people. Others recorded the vigil on cell phones. A few cameras panned across the gifts. Charlie wondered who they were for. Not him, not for the people who died. No matter, he didn't belong here. Charlie kept jogging, skirting the crowd. He pulled his hood up, kept his eyes on the ground. Someone began to sing. Charlie didn't know the song, but could hear the lament in the woman's voice. On the far side now, he stopped. A few voices joined hers, and sounds swelled from the group. Tears welled in Charlie's eyes, and a sob rose in his chest. He rubbed his forearm over his eyes, swallowed the sob, and started running again, sprinting really, until he rounded the next corner, and their voices were lost to the night. Still, he didn't slow. He ran as fast as his tired legs would carry him. He stopped at the end of Maple Avenue, propped his hand on his knees, and closed his eyes. He heaved once, but nothing came up. He stood, wiped strings of spittle from his lips, and stepped onto the street. Small, identical houses lined the road, evidence that Brickton was an old coal town with company roots. The houses had become more run down in the decades since he'd last been here. Almost no space existed between them. Cracked asbestos siding in need of a paint job left most looking forgotten. Once the company and its stores were gone, people often began making the houses their own, adding a bay window or attaching a garage. Here, people hadn't bothered adding those individual touches. Besides the occasional lawn ornament, the houses all looked like they had 100 years ago. He realized too late he should have looked up the address, made sure she still lived here. He'd assumed cameras would be trained on her house, reporters speaking into microphones, community members capturing the moment with cell phones, but apparently Wayne's name hadn't yet been released. 2/3 of the way down the street, Charlie recognized the house where he'd grown up. No different from the others, but when the city had poured a new sidewalk out front, he and Wayne had done what all kids do and carved their initials along the edge. They'd taken a butter knife from Charlie's kitchen but hadn't washed it off afterward. Later, his mom had found it in the sink, concrete hardened along its edges. He hadn't denied what they'd done, though he'd told her it was Wayne's idea. Charlie had walked too far. The house was closer to the college and on the opposite side of the street. Crossing over, he spied it up ahead. A birdhouse, old 10 years ago, perched between the front windows. Now, only a few pieces of wood clung to the siding. The house was dark except for a bluish light flickering through the window. Television. Charlie climbed the porch steps and knocked before he could talk himself out of it. He heard nothing from inside. Then, clearly, the thump, thump, thump of footsteps. The door opened an inch, one eye visible beneath the safety chain. Wayne's mom. "I don't know if you remember me," he said into the crack. She didn't react. "I used to live down the street?" Still no response. "Wayne and I were friends." She cocked her head to the side. "Charlie Folger?" The crack widened. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Buckley closed the door, unlatched the chain, then threw open the door, arms wide. She hugged him, swaying back and forth. The smell of booze clung to her, the light scent of alcoholic perfume. "Charlie," she held him at arm's length. "I was hoping some of Wayne's friends would come. You're the first." She grabbed his arm and pulled him inside. He was thrown back in time. The beat-up brown couch still dominated the tiny living room. The scuffed coffee table was even more scratched. An uncomfortable armchair no one ever used still sat neglected in a corner. Everything was disheveled. Drawers upturned, piles of paper scattered, fingerprint powder on a few surfaces. "Excuse the mess," she said. "Police ripped this place apart looking for God knows what. Like my boy could have..." She grabbed a stack of papers, tapping them against the table to straighten their corners and put them down again, though they were still in disarray. As though there were anything... She shook her head, pressed her fingers to her lips. "You should see Wayne's room. They took half of it with them, left a damn mess of the rest." She raised her chin, added, "Once they accused Wayne, I told them to get out of my house. They said I was making it harder than it had to be. Damn right I am." Her lips were pursed, her chin quivered. Charlie looked at the pictures on the wall, all of them slightly askew. Wayne through middle and high school, a picture of him and Mrs. Buckley wearing identical grins. Him in a high school graduation gown, her wearing his mortarboard. A shot of him in Brickton Community College garb, a t-shirt and ball cap, maybe the same ones he'd worn today. "He's a handsome boy." She paused. He was a handsome boy. She peered at the photos. He was growing into a real good man. A flicker of anger. Charlie couldn't speak, didn't know what to say, so he kept staring at the photos. He was cooling off, his sweat drying, though his clothes were now cold and damp. He shivered. "Let me get something to warm you up." Mrs. Buckley grabbed him by the shoulders and steered him to the couch. She was a tiny woman with sad eyes and flushed cheeks, but her grip was firm. She went into the kitchen, and Charlie settled in. He looked around as though being here would clarify some element of Wayne's character, explained why he'd killed all those people. None did. Still, details were coming back. The wood-paneled walls, the scent of baby powder on Mrs. Buckley's skin, the underlying odor of cigarettes. Charlie had always assumed those details belonged to his own house. Now he wondered just how much of his childhood he'd spent here. Mrs. Buckley returned, handed him a jelly jar filled with an inch of liquor. Charlie had expected coffee or tea, but took the glass just the same. She sat beside him, held up her glass, said, "To Wayne." Charlie held his up, but didn't repeat the toast. She clinked their glasses together and then swallowed the liquor in one gulp. Charlie sipped at his, not sure what to expect. It was sickly sweet, almost medicinal. Still, it warmed his throat and stomach. "He talked about you," she said. "Said you were in his class." "He did?" She nodded. "Wayne came home after that first day, all excited. He said you looked just the same." She stared at him. "You do. Older, of course, but you're still the kid who stole all of Wayne's Halloween candy." "I did?" "When you put all the bad candy you'd gotten in his bag and left all the good stuff?" He shook his head. He didn't remember ever trick-or-treating. His mind was oddly blank when it came to life before West Brickton. Maybe a defense mechanism. Already, Charlie's house felt warmer, more welcoming than the trailer ever had. He could picture kids playing on the sidewalk out front, had vague memories of being one of them. "Wayne asked me if I remembered throwing rocks at those girls up the street," Charlie said. Mrs. Buckley smiled. "He pinged one right in the head. They weren't allowed to play with us after that." Her smile disappeared. "I remember that. The rock hit her just behind the ear and she bled like a pig. You were both grounded for a week. Wayne thought he was too old, but I whipped him good that night. You all were playing the same as ever a few days later." Charlie shook his head, wasn't sure whose memory to believe. She went into the kitchen and returned with a photo album and a mostly empty bottle. She topped off his drink, though he hadn't finished what was already there. She added a few inches to her own glass and plopped onto the couch beside him. "Look at this." She opened the photo album. They started with baby Wayne in some man's arms, presumably Wayne's father. A few of Mrs. Buckley, the man, and Wayne, most of Wayne grinning at the camera, with drool on his chin, with one tooth jutting from his lower jaw, holding a toy truck. In each one, baby Wayne grew a little older, and eventually Charlie joined him, the two of them on their bikes in front of the house, in Wayne's room wearing only t-shirts and underwear, on the porch covered head to toe in mud. They'd been better friends than Charlie remembered. Here was clear evidence that he and Wayne had been like brothers, in identical outfits, setting up a tent in a yard barely large enough for it, 2 birthday cakes side by side with him and Wayne behind them grinning broadly. Charlie wasn't sure how he'd managed to forget a relationship that had clearly been so dear. Maybe because he had no visual reminders of his own. His mom wasn't the type to take pictures. She'd had a few photos of her and Charlie around the trailer, a few of just Charlie. Over the years, she'd put up snapshots of her and different boyfriends. The most recent ones had been of Ed, the guy she'd gone with to Texas. They'd filled his car with their clothes, the TV, a few other small trinkets. "The rest is yours," she'd said, sweeping her arm wide as though the trailer contained treasures. Here, Charlie saw his childhood as he'd never seen it before, happy and loved. His mom wasn't bad. They'd always had enough to eat. The trailer was comfortable if small, and he never really wanted for anything. But she'd never been much interested in him either. The more he saw of Mrs. Buckley's pictures, the worse Charlie felt. His stomach churned when he saw him and Wayne with their arms around each other's necks, grinning, wearing the same outfit. Mrs. Buckley ran her fingers across the picture. The last week of 4th grade. She was beginning to slur her words. "A few days before you and your mom moved." And Charlie suddenly remembered that day when he and Wayne had burst into his house to find his mom surrounded by boxes, half their kitchen already packed. His mom had been smiling. She'd wrapped her arms around him, half lifting him from the ground. "We're leaving this shithole baby," she said. At first, he didn't know what she was talking about. He stared up at her, backpack still on his shoulders. Wayne stood beside the front door. "They accepted our offer on the trailer," she said. She looked so excited that he nodded along. "That's great, Mom." "I already called the school. You don't have to go the rest of this week. You'll start fresh at Falwell Middle in August." "Falwell?" He glanced back at Wayne, who had the screen door open, one foot on the porch. Of course, silly. She ruffled his hair. It's closer to the trailer. Falwell, the next town over. Not Brickton. Not the kids he'd grown up with. Not Wayne. But his mom was never this happy, and she never ruffled his hair, never hugged him. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she swung him back and forth. When he turned back around, Wayne had left. The next day, his mom's boyfriend of the month showed up with a truck. Charlie knocked on Wayne's door, but Mrs. Buckley shook her head and said Wayne wasn't feeling well. Charlie left, never having said goodbye. The next time he remembered seeing Wayne was in Mrs. Freeman's class. Did my mom ever try to get us back together? Once. Mrs. Buckley turned to him. Your mom dropped you off here a week or so after you moved. Wayne locked himself in his room and refused to come out. You sat on the couch watching cartoons until your mom came back. Why didn't you try again? I was busy. Wayne played with the other kids on the street. She shrugged. You disappeared from his life, but he was okay. She turned the page in the album, and Charlie saw that he really had disappeared. Wayne stood beside his mom in one shot, surrounded by other kids who looked vaguely familiar. More shots with kids he'd never seen before. Then Wayne was in high school, pimples dotting his forehead. Some shots with his mom, one or two with other kids. But Charlie noticed Wayne was alone in more and more of the photos. No one but him and his mom in the final pages. The look on Wayne's face grew more serious as he got older, until the smile in the final page looked almost obscene. When they reached an empty page, Mrs. Buckley pressed her palm against it and closed her eyes. Her head bowed. I have to tell you something, Charlie said, pulling his eyes away from the page that would always remain empty. He grabbed the glass of amber liquid and gulped its contents. His gut burned with the alcohol and too many emotions to name. He nodded and squeezed his hand. She nodded and squeezed his hand. He took a deep breath. I'm not sure if you know this yet, but Wayne died in our classroom. She didn't seem to understand and drew her eyebrows together. He cleared his throat, wished he had more alcohol. Class had just started, and we were getting into our groups when we heard gunshots and screams from the hallway. He didn't want to be the one to tell her, but he didn't want anyone else to either. He forced his way in the room. We didn't know it was Wayne. She nodded and pulled her hand from his to wipe her eyes. She put her hand on his cheek, a caress, and he knew she didn't understand, that he had to make her understand. We killed him. He cleared his throat, felt sick. I was the one who killed him. One of the ones who killed him. He paused, remembered the pencil, the blood gushing from Wayne's neck. There were details she didn't need to know, ones he hoped she never knew. I helped kill him. Mrs. Buckley put her hand over her mouth. Charlie hurried on, describing how dark the room was, how scared they all were. His anger returned again when he described the bullets hitting Sutter. He didn't mention Priscilla's pointy shoes or Mrs. Freeman's nails. He didn't mention the pencil. He lingered on how he'd peed his pants. His voice caught when he described joining the others. He stared at his lap as he spoke. Occasionally he glanced up, but her face was turned from him. He described the moment he realized Wayne wasn't breathing. All her tears had dried, and her cheeks were more flushed than they had been. She stood. Charlie remained seated. He bowed his head. I'm sorry, he said, even though it was only a fraction of what he felt. No, she said loudly, you don't get to be sorry. She dug her nails into his bicep hard enough that Charlie wanted to yell out. He let her pull him up. She marched him across the room toward the front door. She opened the storm door, pushed him through, and latched it. Charlie stared through the screen. Her nostrils flared, her eyes bright. I didn't know it was Wayne, he whispered. I wouldn't have done it if I'd known. But he would have. That much he knew. She stared at him. He remained still. He waited for her to slam the door in his face, extinguish the lights. Instead, she said, You killed my boy. She sounded sad, resigned. She started to swing the door closed. But I don't understand why I had to, he said. She froze, her hand wrapped around the door's edge, her knuckles white. Can I come back? He stared at the half moons on her nails as he waited for her response. She closed her eyes, rubbed her temples, then dropped her hands and looked at him again. She nodded and then closed the door softly. The deadbolt clicked, but the light remained on. Thanks, y'all.
Oh my goodness, thank you for that intense reading. Wow, what a rich story.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, so my reference, the birdhouse reference, I don't know, that really jumped out at me when you were reading early on.
Ah, well, it's this. Well, you live in Greenville, you know company towns, you know like these houses that all look alike, and it's like what makes a house stand out. And I grew up in coal country where you had the coal towns, but here you have the mill towns, and it's a really similar thing. I live in an old company neighborhood where all the houses look a little different now, but there are some that still have that cookie cutter quality. So, yeah.
Yes. Jonathan, Abigail?
Laura, thank you for reading that passage. It's really powerful. I got to read the book in the context of being one of the William Morris Award judges, and it was probably a little higher. Oh, plot twist, surprise. I don't know. Um, it was higher in my rankings than it was for several of the other judges, and it was because of scenes like the one you just read. For a story that begins in this moment of decisive action, so much of what happens after that is about inaction, about characters not knowing what to do and sort of going deeply into themselves or into the moment, or staring obsessively at something. And what results, what comes out of that is really what you read in like the first 2/3 of that passage, this deep tenderness, this empathy, this trying to connect person to person following this event. And you handle that so beautifully throughout the novel. But I'm really curious what's the origin story for having four points of view, for having these four characters be the ones to tell this story in their own words from that point onward.
It's this, this is my first novel, and like later I realized that it was kind of folly to do that in a lot of ways. Like it's a really difficult thing to do, and I didn't know that I was as I was jumping into it, but no two people ever respond the same to tragedy, and especially this thing where they're walking out of this room and people are calling them heroes, and each of these characters understands that in a different way and reacts to it in a different way. And I really wanted to capture that. I didn't want to tell a story or the story of the school shooter, of the hero, of the good guy with the gun. I wanted to say, okay, what are some of the different ways that people can react? And I really had to think about who are each of these people? What are they bringing into this? What is their background? And how does that shape who they are? So three of the characters are parents. Um, Charlie is the only one who isn't a parent. And parenting and caregiving and caretaking have so much to do with for all of these characters. And our teacher character is one of the four, and she's caretaking her biological children, but she's also been caretaking these students. And I wanted to explore all of the different ways that we care for others and we think about others in the event of tragedy. So that was my thought process as I came at this and thought, how would these people react?
It's beautifully handled. Thank you. Each one is really interesting in their own right. Each one feels like their story is unfolding in a novel that's entirely their own, and they're, all four interwoven is really powerful, really well done.
Thank you. I'm not sure that all of them are. I've had people say, like, I love to hate this one. And then others say, I don't love any of them, but I can empathize with them. And I'm like, yeah, like I think that's also the power of having these different perspectives is that you don't have to love any of them, and none of them do exactly the right thing. And in fact, they keep messing up. But that's the nature of being human. But I think that's especially the nature of being human when you're dealing with trauma. So, yeah.
Mhm. the messiness of that, of their reactions, feels very human, feels very authentic.
Thank you.
Are you working on another novel now, given your first experiences? Are you continuing with this path?
I am actually working on the second draft of a new novel, and it's only from one perspective. I decided to try something completely different this time. It is a contemporary retelling of the biblical tale of David and Bathsheba, told from Bathsheba's perspective in Appalachia. So the King David character is the county sheriff, and the Bathsheba character is this young woman who is has been trying to get pregnant for quite a while and failing, dealing with a lot of infertility as we meet her at the beginning of the book. So.
That sounds like a fascinating setup for a novel.
Thank you. I'm really, really loving writing it. I don't know, like I love having books out in the world. Like I love it's nice to like hold a book. I really love holding my book and I love it when it shows up in the mail. But no matter like what awards you win or don't win or whatever, for me the writing is about coming back to the desk every day. Like this morning, before I teach in the mornings, I like to sit down. I always come in about an hour, hour and a half early, and I get everything together. And then I sit down at my desk for, even if it's just 30 minutes, but whatever I can fit in before I teach, and I work on the novel. And that's actually my favorite part of writing is the actual sitting down and writing. And the other stuff is lovely and it's sugar on top, but it is the how are these characters going to interact and what's going to happen next.
Are you sharing that with your students, the process?
I talk a lot about it. So I teach here at Furman, I teach first year writing and I teach creative writing, and that's really all I teach. So I'm always talking about the process of writing. I always think we're all writers in the classroom. We're just at different points in our careers. So I talk to them about how I'm thinking about putting a book together and how I'm thinking, and about my process each day. So I'm teaching our senior seminar in creative writing right now, and I'm trying to get them to start a writing practice. Like, what does it look like, especially once they leave college and they don't have these classes anymore? Do they still want to write? And I tell them it doesn't matter, and I'm sure you know this too, Abigail, it doesn't matter how many books you put out. Nobody's begging you to sit down every day and write. It's about you and you wanting to do that. So I tell them like, nope, I sat down, I got my 30 minutes today. Or if I have a bad day and I didn't get my 30 minutes, I'll tell them that like I didn't get my 30 minutes today. Or I almost never write on the weekends. I have a 4-year-old at home, so there's no writing happening. But on the days that my son's in daycare and I can make the time, that's my first activity every morning. So I like to share all of that with my students and also share like we all get rejected a lot in this industry. Like that's just part of.
Part of it.
Mhm. It's like, oh, look, another rejection. But the rejections don't matter so much if you're just writing all the time. So,
Right. And you have to look at it as it's making you a better writer because you're challenging yourself to get better year after year, book after book, learning the craft more and more so
yeah, I remember. So it was spring of 2019, I think. So my first book, Jaws of Life, came out in spring of 18, and I had turned it in spring of 17. So in spring of 19, I'm giving a reading at Augusta University, and afterward, I walked to the back of the room and I was talking to some of the other writers and the person who was running the bookstore. I said, "Man, I just want to sit up there and edit it. I just want to change everything because, I was already like elbow deep in this book while I was giving that reading." And I remember the bookseller saying to me, "You have to think like that book is who you were the day you turned it in. That's who you were as a writer.
right.
It's great that you want to change things because it's showing that you're growing."
Mhm.
So I love that. So even tonight, so this book came out last August. So as I was reading tonight, I'm like, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I want to change. And I cut a couple
Always.
words here and there, but that's the nature of writing. It's like, oh, look,
It's never done.
it's never done
Never
and
done.
never the same writer you were yesterday.
That's
So
right.
it is the growth that happens. And I'm like, oh, I finished a story yesterday. I've been working on this collection while I'm working on the novel. And I finished a story yesterday, finished it for now. I was like, oh, I really like this. I like what I've done here. And I'm like, I really enjoyed some of like the ending. I felt like, oh, I nailed that. And I'm like, in a few years, am I going to go, oh, that isn't that great? And that's great if I'm doing that, just because it means that I've grown even more. So, yeah.
I think every writer goes through that.
I'm always afraid if I ever say, "Oh no, my last book was great." I'm like, "Oh, what do I need to do to like grow some more?" Because I think in the fall, I think Ann Patchett put out an updated version of her book Bel Canto, which I think came out around 2001. Um, and it was highly acclaimed. I love the book. I think it's a gorgeous book, but she put out this new edition where she went in and made notes of what she would change now. And I was like, and I loved it because it doesn't matter how good the book is, there's always something you would change because I've read that book maybe 4 or 5 times. Even I think maybe a couple years ago was the last time I read it, and I still think it's a gorgeous, brilliant book. Such a wonderfully told story. And she's still like, that's how it goes. Like
Yeah.
she still wants to change it. Like,
Feel
no.
that perfectionism of it's never done. Never done.
Mhm.
All of them.
I at some point you have to say this is as far as I'm going to take this project and
Yeah.
move.
You got to move on.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend who just kept rewriting the first 50 pages of her book for 2 years.
Mhm.
And at the end of those 2 years, she had 50 pages.
That's right.
And yeah, and I was like, and when she moved on, she was finally able to figure out what she needed in those 50 pages. So yeah.
Yeah. At some point, you have to let go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Put it out in the world. It'll be a beautiful thing. And you can remember it like this is who I was at that moment in time.
That's right. That's
Um,
right.
It's a snapshot in time. That's the term I've heard in our writers workshop recently.
mm,
I've also, what you said about Ann Patchett reminded me of being at readings with Dory Sanders. In this room, we probably all know who Dory is,
mm,
in which she would be asked to give a reading and she would start telling the story, and people in the audience, because her books have been out for a while, would have the books with them and they'd be trying to follow along, and she wouldn't be saying a single thing that was on that page. She would be telling the story, but she wouldn't be reading it off the page because that day she had a better version of it in her
Right.
mind. Why be beholden to the book? The book was forever
That's
ago.
right.
Today we're going to tell this version of the story.
She had a bigger vocabulary at that point.
And I loved that she would do that. It was really wonderful to see that play out in front of an audience.
that is super fun. That is like, oh, and this, no, I have a whole new version. I want to do that now. I'm like, no, I want to find a new version of a story.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I love that you get to share them in the classroom and help them with their best practices now and in the future. That's so important. Yeah. Yes. So, and congratulations again on the stone catchers. So, I guess I will go ahead and wrap it up with a few announcements. I have a couple of highlights to share on the Pat Conroy Literary Center calendar. The ninth annual Low Country Book Club Convention is happening on Friday, September 26th. And the 10th annual Pat Conroy Literary Festival is happening October 23rd through 26th. So be sure and stay close to the Pat Conroy Literary Center website and social media channels for more information about those and all the numerous workshops that happen through the center. So thank you again, Laura, Abigail, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure, and have a great night.